Hello and welcome to the short Vort on Parshas Mishpatim. This week's short Vort is adapted from R Frand on all Parsha from Vaera 5782. And the reason for that is because this works for Parshas Bo as well as Mishpatim, and we will go beyond R Frand's points. In Parachav Beis, Pasuk Lamed, it says, Treifa lo sochelu. In this week's Parsha, Jews do not eat torn up animals. Our animals have to be slaughtered properly. If they're not, lakel tashlichun, they are thrown to the dogs. The dogs get to eat the nevelos and the treifos, says Rashi. For what reason did the dogs merit that we give them our nevelos and treifos? Because going back to Parshas Bo in Perikid Al Pasuk Zayin, it says Chol b'nei Yisrael lo yechratz kelev l'shono, that during Makas Bechoros, when the Egyptians were crying out for the losses that their firstborns were dying and they were suffering, the Jews had total tranquility, so much so that a dog didn't wet its tongue, the dog didn't bark, it didn't howl. So for that action or inaction, the dogs were rewarded forever. But R Frand says, but why are the dogs rewarded for not barking? Big deal. The frogs in Sephardia, some of them jumped into the ovens. They risked their life. They're moser nefesh, not just not barking. So why were the frogs not rewarded? And on top of this, in Perik Shira, the Song of the Universe, the final climactic singing to Hashem is by the dog. So there too, the dog was rewarded for the same action of not barking. It actually got the last word, you could say. So R Frand says there's a difference. It's a lesson that the Torah wants to teach us, that greater is the dog not barking than even the frog jumping into a hot oven. And the reason for this is to teach us the metaphor of being kovesh our yetzer, that overcoming our inclinations, our natural way. The dogs, all they do is bark. Anything happens, you hear them bark and they howl and they make all the noise. It's not normal for them to be quiet. For them to be quiet, it's against their nature, and for that they have to be rewarded. When we go against our nature, we are rewarded too. So that is a greater, to go against the nature is even tougher than jumping into a hot oven. Now the topic of being kovesh yetzer fits this week's parshas. I heard today from Rabbi Yitzi Olbaum. He talked about, of the more than 50 mitzvahs in parshas Mishpatim, that the two of them was prika and te'ina, loading and unloading, or unloading and loading an animal. That if someone needs help, you help them either load the animal or unload it. And if you have both of them at the same time, the normal answer is that you do the unloading first, because there's the additional aspect of sar b'lechayim. We don't want the animal that's suffering under the burden of a heavy load to suffer more than necessary, so that gets precedence. However, there is one exception, and that's when your enemy needs to be loaded, his animal. And then even if your friend has an animal that needs to be unloaded, precedence goes to the enemy. So why are we breaking the rule? In order to break our yetzer, to break our natural tendency. Again, that's so strong, such a powerful attribute to change what we are inclined to do and serve Hashem. So that's the point being taught here. Now, when I shared a few weeks ago the story, so one person said, but frogs, it's against their nature to go in. They don't just hop into ovens, so that would be against their nature also. So firstly, I re-listened to R Frand, and he says that some of them, that frogs jump here, there, and sometimes they'll be and they'll jump into an oven. However, I'd like to suggest a chiddush, that the difference is that in the case of the dogs, it was all the dogs were silent. None of the dogs barked. However, when it came to the frogs, it wasn't a universal thing, that only some of the frogs went into the tanur. Therefore, the dogs could get a universal reward, but the frogs would not. And this would fit something I saw on Aish.com, where in Perik Zayin Pasuk Chavtes says, "Vayimusu hatzfardim min habatim umin hachatzeros umin hasados." After the plague of the frogs was over, the frogs died, whether the ones from the houses, the ones from the courtyards, and the ones from the fields. But the Daas, Zekenim, Tosafo, and the Chizkuni, they point out that it doesn't say that the ones that went into the tanur died, that the ones that were willing to sacrifice themselves by going into hot oven, they didn't die. And that was the reward for being willing to be most of the nefesh, that they actually survived the end of the Magefa. So I think that would fit the idea, because not all of them went in. But so we have, by this method of measuring, we have the dogs have an eternal punishment to them and their descendants, because all of them acted one way. But and the sum of the frogs that were willing to risk their lives, so not only did they live, but they were zochet to have descendants. They didn't give any special reward to the descendants, but the bottom line is they had baby future frogs. So once again, take away the lesson is to be kovish your yetzer, overcome your inclinations, whether it's anger or whatever it is, to be able to change your midos is an important and powerful thing that is worthy of a tremendous reward. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful week. Like, share, and subscribe, and a great Shabbos.